November 9, 1944. The Lorraine region of northeastern France, 6 kilometers south of Metz. Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann pressed his eye against the commander's periscope of his Panzer Mark IV, watching the American column approach through the morning mist with methodical precision. 12 Sherman tanks, advancing in loose formation along the muddy farm road below his concealed position. Behind them, half-tracks carrying infantry, supply trucks, the standard American mechanized advance he had observed countless times since the Normandy breakout. His position was perfect. 3 Panzer Mark IVs and 2 Panther tanks positioned along the tree line on elevated ground. Hull down, behind earthen berms his crew had spent 2 days preparing. The Americans would pass within 400 meters, completely exposed in the shallow valley below. Every gun had been zeroed on the road. Every crew knew their assigned targets. The ambush would be textbook perfect, the kind of tactical victory that German armor doctrine had perfected through years of combat experience. What Hartmann could not have anticipated, what no German tank commander operating in France during the autumn of 1944 could have fully comprehended, was that destroying American armor had become merely the opening act of a tactical sequence that would end with his own destruction. The Americans possessed something that rendered traditional ambush tactics obsolete, not superior tanks or better armor, but a fire support coordination system so rapid, so overwhelming, and so methodically integrated that it transformed every engagement into a race against time that German forces could never win. The mathematics of the coming encounter had been calculated long before Hartmann's Panthers moved into position. American forces operating in France during late 1944 functioned as components of an integrated fire support system that could deliver devastating artillery concentrations with speed that defied German tactical assumptions. Every American armored column moved under the protective umbrella of forward observers, equipped with radios linked directly to battalion, division, and corps artillery assets. These observers could request fire missions and receive accurate, coordinated responses in timeframes that German artillery doctrine considered operationally impossible. Hartmann had transferred to the Western Front in August 1944 after 2 years commanding armor on the Eastern Front. His combat experience against Soviet forces had forged assumptions about armored warfare that seemed universally applicable. Tank versus tank engagements were decided by gun performance, armor thickness, crew training, and tactical positioning. Artillery support remained a separate operation, coordinated through lengthy radio communications between forward observers and distant fire direction centers. The time required to call, calculate, and deliver artillery fire provided attacking forces critical minutes to press advantages or withdraw before becoming vulnerable to counter-battery operations. The Americans operated under entirely different principles that would transform this carefully planned ambush into a demonstration of why German armored forces could no longer achieve tactical success even when holding every conventional advantage. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Hartmann keyed his throat microphone, speaking quietly to his crew and the other tank commanders positioned along the tree line. Range to lead vehicle 420 meters. Prepare to engage on my command. Target priority as briefed. Shoot and displace immediately after firing. The standard German armor ambush doctrine refined through countless successful engagements. Strike hard, achieve maximum destruction during initial volleys, then withdraw before enemy forces could organize effective response. Through his periscope, Hartmann observed the American column with the clinical assessment of an experienced armor officer. The lead Sherman was an M4A3, the 75mm gun variant that German crews had learned to respect without fearing. Adequate armor for its weight class, reliable mechanical performance, but fundamentally inferior to German Panthers in direct combat. The Sherman's frontal armor measured 64mm at the hull, 91mm on the turret front. Hartmann's Panther mounted a 75mm KWK-42 gun, capable of penetrating Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. At 400 meters, the outcome was predetermined. What Hartmann did not observe, could not have observed from his concealed position, was the small radio antenna extending from the turret of the 3rd Sherman in column. The M4 observation tank differed from standard Shermans only in its enhanced radio equipment and the presence of a forward observer team from the 369th Field Artillery Battalion. Captain Robert Mitchell occupied the position normally reserved for the tank's loader, surrounded by radio equipment that connected him directly to 4 battalions of artillery positioned 10 kilometers behind the advancing American column. Mitchell had been scanning the terrain ahead with practiced thoroughness since the column departed its assembly area at dawn. The tree line to the north showed characteristics that triggered recognition patterns developed through months of combat experience. Slight earth discoloration, suggesting recent digging. Unusual shadow patterns indicating possible vehicle concealment. Most significantly, the tactical position offered perfect fields of fire against American forces advancing along the Valley Road. If German armor remained in this sector, and intelligence suggested it did, this tree line represented the logical ambush position. Mitchell keyed his radio, speaking with the calm precision that characterized American forward observers executing standard procedures. Fire Direction Center, this is Fox Oscar 36. Fire Mission. Grid coordinates 513427. Suspected enemy armor, concealed positions, tree line. Request battery, high explosive, variable time fuse, prepare for immediate suppression on my command. The transmission took 11 seconds. Mitchell's words traveled via FM radio to the Fire Direction Center of the 369th Field Artillery Battalion, located at a farm complex 10.3 kilometers southwest of the American columns. Position. The FDC received Mitchell's coordinates, consulted pre-computed firing tables, calculated azimuth and elevation data for 4 gun batteries, and transmitted fire commands to 16 115mm howitzers within 90 seconds of Mitchell's initial request. Hartmann remained unaware that his position had been identified, that American artillery was calculating firing solutions, that the tactical advantage he believed absolute was evaporating with every passing second. His attention remained focused on the approaching Sherman column, his finger resting lightly on the gunner's firing trigger as range closed to optimal engagement distance. Fire, Hartmann commanded quietly. His gunner squeezed the trigger. The Panther's 75mm gun fired with the distinctive crack that had become synonymous with German armor superiority. The armor-piercing round struck the lead Sherman's frontal hull, penetrating cleanly through the riveted armor and detonating the tank's ammunition storage. The Sherman erupted in flames, its turret lifting slightly before settling back onto the burning hull. Along the tree line, 4 other German tanks fired simultaneously, executing the ambush with textbook precision. 2 more Shermans exploded under the impact of German armor-piercing rounds. A 4th Sherman took a glancing hit that disabled its track but left the crew uninjured. Within 20 seconds, the carefully coordinated American advance had been transformed into chaos, but the chaos would prove temporary, and the price for creating it would exceed anything Hartmann had calculated. Captain Mitchell had observed the muzzle flashes of German guns through the vision slits of his Sherman observation tank. The flashes provided precise location data, confirming his earlier suspicion about the tree line position. He keyed his radio immediately, his voice retaining the same calm precision despite the violent destruction occurring around him. Fire Direction Center, Fox Oscar 36. Grid 5, 13427. 5 tanks, hull down positions. Request immediate suppression. Fire for effect. The transmission took 8 seconds. At the Fire Direction Center, 10 kilometers distant, duty officers executed procedures they had rehearsed countless times during training and combat operations. The fire commands had already been calculated during Mitchell's initial call. Only final authorization was required to commence firing. The FDC officer keyed his transmitter. All batteries. Fire mission authorized. Commence firing. 16 155mm howitzers, divided into 4 batteries of 4 guns each, began firing within 15 seconds of receiving the command. Each gun crew had been trained to achieve rates of fire approaching 1 round per minute under combat conditions. The M1 howitzer, designated the Long Tom by American forces, was one of the most effective artillery pieces produced during World War II. Its 43-kilogram high-explosive shell, could be delivered to ranges exceeding 14,000 meters, with accuracy sufficient to strike targets within 50 meters of the intended impact point. But accuracy alone could not explain the devastating effectiveness of American artillery. The true revolution was coordination. The 4 batteries firing on Hartmann's position were geographically separated, positioned at different distances from the target area. Their fire direction officers had calculated the precise moment each gun must fire to ensure all shells arrived at the target simultaneously. This technique, called time on target, represented the pinnacle of artillery sophistication. It required precise knowledge of each gun's range to target, exact calculation of shell flight times, and split-second coordination across multiple batteries operating miles apart. German artillery doctrine had nothing equivalent. Soviet artillery, which Hartmann had faced for 2 years, operated on entirely different principles. Russian guns would fire ranging shots, permitting defending forces precious seconds to seek cover before the main barrage commenced. American artillery eliminated that grace period entirely. Hartmann had already given the command to displace. His driver shifted the Panther into reverse, preparing to back away from the firing position and relocate to the alternate position 500 meters distant. Standard doctrine: shoot and move. Never remain in a location after firing, because counter-battery fire would inevitably target known gun positions. But the Americans were not following the timeline Hartmann's experience had led him to expect. Based on his combat against Soviet forces, he calculated he had 10 to 15 minutes before artillery fire might begin falling on his position. Time sufficient to displace, relocate, and prepare for follow-up engagement if tactical conditions warranted. His expectations were about to be shattered by operational realities he could not have anticipated. Lieutenant Friedrich Weber commanded the Panzer Mark IV, positioned 30 meters to Hartmann's left. His crew had also fired and achieved a kill against the American column. Weber had observed his gunners that round penetrate a Sherman side armor with devastating effect. The American tank had slewed sideways, smoke pouring from its engine compartment as the crew bailed out through hatches. A successful engagement by any measure. Weber gave the command to displace, watching his driver begin backing their 30-ton vehicle away from the firing position. Then the world transformed. The first American shells arrived 3 minutes and 47 seconds after Captain Mitchell transmitted his fire for effect command. Hartmann had no warning, no ranging shots, no preliminary bombardment. One instant, his Panther was reversing smoothly from its firing position. The next instant, the tree line erupted in a sequence of explosions that seemed to detonate simultaneously across the entire German position. The shells were fused for airburst, detonating 10 to 15 meters above ground level. This was the variable time fuse, the proximity fuse, the technological achievement that would transform artillery warfare more profoundly than any advancement since the introduction of rifled barrels. Each shell contained a miniature radio transmitter that broadcast signals during flight. When the reflected signal indicated proximity to ground or objects, the fuse triggered detonation at optimal height for maximum fragmentation effect. Traditional artillery shells, detonating on ground impact, created relatively small lethal radius, their fragments traveling horizontally or burying themselves in soil. Airburst shells scattered fragments in a cone-shaped pattern that covered vastly larger areas. Men lying prone or in shallow foxholes, who might survive ground impacts, were exposed to fragments raining down from above. Vehicles with thin top armor, nearly impervious to ground bursts, became vulnerable to fragments penetrating their weakest surfaces. Hartmann's Panther took multiple fragment impacts across its engine deck and turret roof. The fragments, traveling at velocities exceeding 1,000 meters per second, punched through the Panther's thin top armor like paper. One fragment severed hydraulic lines controlling the turret traverse. Another penetrated the engine compartment, destroying the fuel injection pump and igniting a small fire. More fragments struck the external fuel tanks, rupturing them and showering the vehicle with gasoline that immediately ignited. Weber's Mark IV suffered catastrophic damage during the initial salvo. A 155mm shell detonated directly above his tank, the shaped fragmentation pattern designed specifically to engage armored vehicles. Fragments penetrated the Mark IV's turret roof, killing Weber and his gunner instantly. The remaining crew members, though wounded, managed to evacuate before flames consumed the vehicle. The bombardment continued with mechanical precision. American doctrine called for fire missions to be sustained until forward observers confirmed target destruction or ordered cessation. Mitchell, observing from his Sherman, could see the tree line through the smoke and dust. Secondary explosions indicated German vehicles taking hits. He maintained the fire mission for another 3 minutes, watching as additional salvos transformed the German ambush position into a devastation zone. Hartmann abandoned his burning Panther, pulling his injured radio operator through the commander's hatch as flames spread through the engine compartment. Around him, the carefully prepared German position had been reduced to chaos. Of 5 tanks that had initiated the ambush, 3 were burning. A 4th showed visible damage and appeared immobile. Only 1 Panther remained operational, its crew having successfully displaced before the artillery barrage achieved full effect. The entire sequence, from Hartmann's initial ambush to the destruction of his position, had consumed exactly 7 minutes and 19 seconds. The Americans had called, calculated, coordinated, and delivered a devastating artillery concentration in less time than German doctrine suggested was physically possible. More significantly, they had done so while simultaneously dealing with the tactical crisis of being ambushed by superior German armor. Hartmann crouched in a muddy drainage ditch 200 meters from his destroyed Panther, watching American infantry dismount from their half-tracks and begin advancing toward the tree line under covering fire from surviving Shermans. His ambush had destroyed 4 American tanks, a respectable tactical success by any conventional measure, but the cost had been 3 destroyed Panthers and Mark IVs, 2 dead crew members, 7 wounded, and complete loss of tactical position. The equation did not favor German forces. What stunned Hartmann more profoundly than the physical destruction was the speed. The Americans had not simply called artillery support, they had called, coordinated, and delivered precision fire in a time frame that suggested their forward observers possessed capabilities approaching real-time fire control. The implications were staggering. Every German tactical operation depended on time-distance calculations that assumed artillery response required 10 to 15 minutes minimum. If Americans could deliver fire in under 4 minutes, then German forces could never disengage safely from any encounter. Oberst Heinrich Müller commanded the tank battalion to which Hartmann's company belonged. His headquarters, located in a requisitioned farmhouse 8 kilometers from the ambush site, received Hartmann's after-action report with growing concern. Müller had commanded armor on both eastern and western fronts. He understood tank warfare intimately, knew the capabilities and limitations of German and Allied armor comprehensively. But the pattern Hartmann described suggested operational realities that transcended traditional armored combat. Müller had received similar reports from other units operating in the Lorraine sector. German forces achieving initial tactical success through superior positioning or equipment quality, then being devastated by American artillery that arrived with impossible speed. The reports described scenarios that violated every assumption about artillery employment that German doctrine considered fundamental. Forward observers calling fire from multiple battalions simultaneously, shells arriving without ranging shots, airburst fuses that negated cover and concealment. Most disturbing of all, response times measuring in minutes rather than the tens of minutes German experience suggested was normal. The tactical implications were profound and immediate. If American forces could deliver artillery this rapidly, then German armor could not operate using traditional ambush and withdraw tactics. The time required to displace after firing had been compressed below the minimum necessary for successful disengagement. Every engagement risked becoming a fight to destruction, where German technical superiority in tank versus tank combat was negated by overwhelming American fire support. Stabsfeld Kurt Zimmermann, Müller's operations officer, compiled intelligence reports from across the Lorraine sector during the week following Hartmann's engagement. The pattern was consistent and undeniable. German forces were being systematically destroyed not by American armor, which remained technically inferior to German Panthers and Tigers, but by American artillery that could be called with speed that seemed to approach instantaneous response. Zimmermann's analysis, preserved in battalion records discovered after the war, revealed his professional recognition of the problem. The Americans have created integration between armor and artillery that renders our tactical doctrine obsolete. Their tank commanders can request fire support and receive accurate responses before our forces can complete standard displacement procedures. This capability transforms every engagement into a siege, where time favors the Americans absolutely. We cannot withdraw faster than they can call artillery. We cannot advance faster than they can coordinate fire. We are trapped in a tactical environment where our technical superiority is irrelevant. The foundation of American artillery superiority had been constructed through systematic analysis and institutional learning that began years before Pearl Harbor. The United States Army had studied World War I artillery operations extensively, identifying deficiencies and developing solutions that would transform fire support into a decisive weapon system. The Fire Direction Center concept emerged from this analysis, creating centralized coordination that allowed multiple batteries to function as unified weapon systems rather than independent units. But FDC methodology alone could not achieve the response times that German forces were experiencing in France during late 1944. The true revolution was training. American artillery crews rehearsed fire missions until they could execute procedures with mechanical precision. Forward observers practiced calling fire until grid coordinate transmission became instinctive. Fire direction officers solved calculation problems until they could read firing tables and compute solutions in seconds rather than minutes. This training was supported by technological advantages that German forces could not match. American radios provided clear, interference-free communication across distances that rendered German AM equipment obsolete. The SCR 508 radio, standard equipment in American armor by 1944, offered frequency-modulated transmission with range exceeding 25 kilometers under favorable conditions. German armor communicated with radios whose range rarely exceeded 5 to 8 kilometers and whose audio quality degraded rapidly with distance or interference. More significantly, American forces possessed radios in quantities that seemed unlimited compared to German allocations. Every American armored battalion deployed dozens of radio-equipped vehicles. Every infantry regiment had forward observer teams with dedicated radio equipment. The communications network that connected these radios to fire direction centers and artillery battalions functioned with reliability that transformed fire support from periodic assistance to continuous availability. The M1 155mm howitzer represented American industrial capacity at its most effective. Rock Island, Arsenal, and other facilities had perfected manufacturing processes that allowed rapid production to precise tolerances. By late 1944, over 900 M1 howitzers had been produced, with monthly production continuing to increase. Each weapon was manufactured to specifications, ensuring consistent performance across all guns. Ammunition was produced with similar precision, guaranteeing that every shell would perform identically, regardless of which gun fired it. This standardization enabled the creation of firing tables that revolutionized artillery mathematics. Teams of calculators working with mechanical computers and slide rules had computed firing solutions for every conceivable combination of variables: range to target, barrel elevation, propellant temperature, wind speed and direction, altitude differences, barrel wear. Every factor affecting shell trajectory had been calculated and tabulated. The resulting tables, printed in compact volumes carried by every fire direction officer, eliminated the need for field calculations that traditionally consumed precious minutes during fire missions. German artillery doctrine had nothing comparable. German gun crews calculated firing solutions using basic tables that required extensive field computation to account for variables. This process was mathematically sound but chronologically disastrous. The additional minutes required for calculation meant German artillery could not match American response times regardless of crew training or equipment quality. Hartmann's experience following his failed ambush provided intimate understanding of the disparity. He spent 4 days evading American patrols while attempting to reach German lines. During this period, he observed American operations with the clinical attention of a professional soldier studying an opponent. What he witnessed confirmed his assessment that German forces faced tactical realities they could not overcome through traditional military excellence. American columns moved with confidence that suggested absolute faith in their fire support umbrella. Tank commanders showed none of the caution German forces had learned to employ when operating in areas where artillery might engage them. The Americans seemed to understand that their forward observers could request and receive fire support faster than any opponent could exploit tactical opportunities. This confidence translated into aggressive movement and rapid exploitation of openings that German forces could never match. Hartmann observed one engagement from concealed position 800 meters distant. An American armored column encountered German anti-tank guns positioned to ambush forces advancing along a valley road. The German guns achieved complete surprise, destroying 2 Shermans with their initial volley. Standard doctrine called for American forces to withdraw, reconnoiter, and develop a coordinated assault plan that might consume hours in execution. Instead, the American column halted, deployed smoke grenades to obscure German observation, and called artillery within seconds of being engaged. Hartmann watched through binoculars as the German gun positions began receiving fire less than 4 minutes after the ambush initiated. The artillery concentration was precise and devastating, employing airburst shells that negated the concealment and cover the German crews had spent days preparing. Within 7 minutes of achieving tactical surprise, the German position had been neutralized and the American column resumed its advance. The tactical sequence Hartmann observed represented the fundamental transformation that had occurred in American military doctrine. The integration of armor, infantry, and artillery had been perfected to the point where response to enemy contact became nearly automatic. German forces could not match this integration because they lacked the radio equipment, the training infrastructure, and most critically, the industrial capacity to sustain artillery operations at American intensity levels. Captain Robert Mitchell, the forward observer whose fire mission had destroyed Hartmann's ambush position, exemplified the type of specialized training that created American artillery superiority. Mitchell had completed 16 weeks of artillery school at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where he mastered radio procedures, map reading, target, identification, and fire adjustment techniques through endless repetition. He had learned to visualize 3-dimensional artillery trajectories, calculate corrections for observed fire, and communicate with fire direction centers using standardized terminology that eliminated ambiguity. More significantly, Mitchell understood combined arms operations intimately. He had trained with armor units, learning how tank commanders thought and operated. He understood infantry tactics and could anticipate how ground forces would maneuver. This comprehensive tactical education allowed him to position himself optimally during advances, identifying potential threat locations before enemy forces revealed themselves through hostile action. German forward observers, by contrast, were typically artillery officers with limited infantry or armor experience. They understood their own weapon system, but lacked the tactical breadth to integrate fire support seamlessly with maneuver forces. This specialization created coordination delays that proved fatal when facing American forces that had eliminated such barriers through comprehensive training. The variable time fuse deserves particular attention as the technological achievement that multiplied American artillery effectiveness beyond anything German forces could counter. The VT fuse, also called the proximity fuse, contained a miniature radar system inside the artillery shell's nose. A transmitter broadcast radio signals during flight. When reflected signals indicated the shell was approaching the ground or any object, the receiver triggered detonation at optimal height. Development of the VT fuse represented one of the most significant scientific achievements of World War II, creating a radio transmitter and receiver compact enough to fit inside an artillery shell, rugged enough to survive firing acceleration exceeding 20,000 times gravity, and reliable enough to function consistently under combat conditions, required solving engineering problems that seemed insurmountable. Yet American scientists and engineers had accomplished precisely this, producing a weapon that transformed artillery from an area effect weapon into a precision instrument. The fuse had first seen combat use against Japanese aircraft at Guadalcanal in January 1943, achieving dramatic success that validated the technology. Throughout 1943 and 44, VT fuses proved devastatingly effective in anti-aircraft operations, particularly against Vone flying bombs threatening England. However, Concerns about the technology reaching German hands prevented its employment in ground operations over Europe until December 1944. General Dwight Eisenhower personally requested authorization to employ VT fuses during the Battle of the Bulge, arguing that their effectiveness justified security risks. His request was approved, and American artillery began using proximity-fused shells against German ground forces for the first time during the Ardennes campaign. The results exceeded even optimistic projections. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Traditional artillery shells with time fuses required calculating the precise moment of detonation, then setting the fuse accordingly before firing. Wind conditions, temperature, barrel wear, propellant temperature all affected shell flight time. Even small errors meant shells exploding too high to be effective or burying themselves before detonating. Skilled artillery crews could achieve reasonable accuracy, but the process remained imprecise and required multiple ranging shots to achieve optimal results. VT fuses eliminated these variables entirely. Every shell detonated at optimal height automatically, regardless of environmental conditions. The airburst pattern created by proximity-fused shells was devastating against personnel and light vehicles. Fragments scattered in a cone-shaped pattern covering vastly larger areas than ground bursts. Studies conducted after the war revealed that VT-fused shells were 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional time-fused shells against equivalent targets. For German soldiers experiencing VT fuse bombardment, the psychological impact was as devastating as the physical effects. Traditional artillery training taught troops to seek any ground depression at the first explosion. Even shallow cover provided protection from fragments traveling horizontally. But VT-fused shells negated this protection entirely, showering fragments downward onto troops in foxholes or behind minimal cover. The knowledge that standard protective techniques were ineffective induced operational paralysis in some units. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt, a veteran of Hartmann's company who survived the ambush and subsequent artillery barrage, documented his experience in a diary discovered by American forces after the war. His account provides insight into the psychological dimension of facing American fire support. We had learned in Russia to go flat at the first explosion. This gave us seconds to locate deeper cover before the main bombardment. But the American shells, these demon shells, as we began calling them, exploded above us. Fragments came down like rain. Men in foxholes, men who should have been protected, were struck by metal falling from the sky. There was no defense except deep bunkers, and we had no time to construct deep bunkers. Every engagement became a calculation of whether we could achieve our objective and withdraw before American artillery destroyed us. Usually, we could not. The industrial capacity that produced American artillery and ammunition in seemingly unlimited quantities represented another dimension of superiority that German forces could not comprehend from their position of increasing resource scarcity. By late 1944, American factories were producing artillery pieces and shells at rates that exceeded German manufacturing capacity by factors of 10 or more in some categories. Rock Island Arsenal alone produced over 10,105 mm howitzers during the war. Multiple factories manufactured 155 mm howitzers and heavier weapons. Shell production reached staggering levels. The United States produced over 93 million artillery rounds of all calibers during World War II, averaging over 15 million rounds annually from 1942 through 1945. German production, hampered by Allied strategic bombing, resource shortages, and inefficient industrial organization, could not approach these figures. By late 1944, German artillery batteries often operated at reduced strength with worn-out guns and no replacements available. More critically, ammunition production could not sustain intensive operations. German batteries were frequently limited to minimal daily allowances, sometimes as few as 2 to 3 shells per gun per day for sustained operations. American batteries faced no such restrictions. Forward observers could request fire freely, knowing that ammunition supply was effectively unlimited. This disparity transformed the tactical calculus of engagement. German forces had to ration every shell, carefully weighing whether particular targets merited expenditure of irreplaceable ammunition. American forces could employ artillery lavishly, saturating suspected enemy positions with fire that guaranteed results through sheer volume, even when precise target location remained uncertain. Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller documented this disparity in his battalion war diary with stark clarity. We received 100 shells per gun for the entire month of November, 100 shells to support battalion operations across a front of 12 kilometers against continuous American pressure. I was required to personally authorize each fire mission, justifying why this particular target merited expenditure of ammunition we could not replace. Meanwhile, American artillery fired thousands of shells daily with no apparent concern for conservation. We fought a poor man's war against a rich man's opponent. The outcome was never in doubt, only the timeline of our inevitable defeat. The tactical situation in Lorraine during November 1944 demonstrated these dynamics with brutal clarity. German forces held prepared defensive positions that should have provided significant advantages against attacking American forces. The Germans possessed interior lines, fortified positions, and technical superiority in many weapon systems, but they lacked the artillery ammunition to sustain defensive operations against American offensives, supported by effectively unlimited fire support. American forces advancing through Lorraine employed artillery with systematic ruthlessness. Every German position identified through reconnaissance or contact was subjected to devastating bombardment before American infantry or armor attempted assault. The bombardments employed mix of high explosive and proximity-fused shells that guaranteed destruction of personnel and equipment regardless of cover or concealment quality. German defenders learned that survival required either deep bunkers proof against 155mm shells or immediate withdrawal at first indication of American observation. Neither option was operationally viable. Constructing deep bunkers required time and materials German forces did not possess. Withdrawing immediately upon American observation meant abandoning defensive positions without fighting, guaranteeing rapid American advance. German commanders were trapped between tactical options that both led to defeat, differing only in the speed of their inevitable outcome. Hartmann eventually reached German lines 4 days after his ambush failed. His journey through American-controlled territory provided him with comprehensive understanding of American operational capabilities that would have seemed impossible based on pre-war German assessments of American military potential. The Americans, he observed, operated with confidence, efficiency, and material abundance that reflected industrial capacity beyond anything Germany could match. Upon reaching battalion headquarters, Hartmann submitted a detailed after-action report that Oberst Müller forwarded to division with strong endorsement. The report outlined the tactical sequence of the ambush and subsequent artillery engagement with clinical precision, emphasizing the speed of American artillery response as the critical factor that transformed German tactical success into operational failure. Müller appended his own assessment, reflecting professional recognition of broader implications. Oberleutnant Hartmann's report confirms pattern observed across this entire front. American artillery response times average 4 to 6 minutes from initial contact to effective fire delivery. This response speed renders traditional German armor tactics obsolete. Our forces cannot achieve tactical objectives and withdraw before American artillery engages them. Every engagement risks becoming battle of attrition, where American material superiority guarantees their victory, regardless of German tactical skill. Recommend immediate doctrinal revision to account for these operational realities. The doctrinal revision Müller recommended would never be implemented effectively. German forces lacked the radio equipment, training infrastructure, and ammunition stocks necessary to match American capabilities. More fundamentally, German military culture emphasized individual initiative and tactical flexibility over the systematic standardization that enabled American artillery effectiveness. German commanders were trained to make independent decisions based on immediate, tactical situations. This approach had proven successful during early war campaigns, where German technical and tactical superiority provided decisive advantages, but by late 1944, the operational environment had transformed completely. American forces had developed systematic procedures that amplified the effectiveness of average soldiers beyond what exceptional German soldiers could achieve through individual excellence. The artillery coordination system that destroyed Hartmann's ambush represented this transformation perfectly. Mitchell, the American forward observer, was a competent officer executing well-rehearsed procedures using reliable equipment supported by abundant resources. He was not exceptional by any objective measure, yet his effectiveness exceeded anything Hartmann could counter despite superior German technical training and combat experience. The personal dimension of this transformation becomes evident through examination of individual experiences on both sides. Captain Mitchell survived the war and later provided detailed interviews about his role as forward observer during the Lorraine campaign. His recollections reveal the mindset of American soldiers operating within the fire support system that proved so devastatingly effective. "We understood that artillery was our primary weapon," Mitchell recalled during a 1983 interview preserved in the United States Army Military History Institute archives. "Tank guns were useful for engaging point targets, but artillery won battles. My job was identifying targets and calling fire fast enough to destroy enemy forces before they could disengage. The training we received emphasized speed above all else. We practiced radio procedures until we could transmit grid coordinates and fire requests in under 10 seconds. We memorized terrain features so we could identify locations instantly without extensive map consultation. Most importantly, we trained with the fire direction centers until we understood exactly what information they needed and how to provide it efficiently." Mitchell's description emphasizes the systematic nature of American artillery employment. Forward observers were not heroic individuals, making brilliant tactical decisions. They were skilled technicians, executing standardized procedures that had been refined through extensive training and combat experience. This systematization eliminated the variability that characterized German operations, where effectiveness depended heavily on individual commander quality. The fire direction centers that received Mitchell's calls represented another dimension of American systematic superiority. These operations centers functioned with the precision of well-designed machines, processing fire requests through standardized procedures that eliminated delay and error. Duty officers consulted pre-computed firing tables rather than performing field calculations. Communications specialists maintained radio, contact with forward observers and gun batteries simultaneously, coordinating information flow that kept all parties informed in real time. Plotting specialists tracked ammunition expenditure, gun status, and target locations on detailed maps that provided comprehensive battlefield visualization. German artillery operations had nothing comparable. German battery commanders calculated firing solutions using basic tables and field computations. Communications were conducted through radio systems with limited range and reliability. Coordination between batteries required lengthy radio exchanges between commanders who might lack common tactical pictures of the battlefield situation. The cumulative effect of these limitations was artillery that functioned adequately by pre-war standards, but could not compete with American systematic integration. The technological sophistication of American artillery extended beyond the guns and fuses to encompass the entire support infrastructure. American artillery battalions in France operated with motor transport that allowed rapid displacement between firing positions. German artillery remained predominantly horse-drawn, requiring hours to limber, move, and unlimber weapons that American batteries could displace in 20 to 30 minutes. This mobility difference had profound tactical implications. American batteries could fire missions, then relocate before German counter-battery fire located them. German batteries, once identified, could rarely escape destruction because displacement required time they did not have. The result was systematic attrition of German artillery, while American fire support maintained full effectiveness throughout campaigns. Gefreiter Paul Richter, assigned to a German artillery battery in Lorraine, documented this disparity with the frustrated recognition of a soldier watching his side lose through systematic disadvantage rather than tactical failure. His diary, discovered after the war, provides ground-level perspective on German artillery operations during this period. "We occupied firing position in woods south of Metz. We had 50 shells per gun, our entire allocation for the week. We fired a mission supporting our infantry attempting to halt American advance. Within 8 minutes, American counter-battery fire began falling on our position. We attempted to displace, but we required 2 hours minimum to limber our guns with horses and move them. The American shells kept falling. We lost 2 guns destroyed, 1 damaged, 5 men killed, 9 wounded. We abandoned remaining guns and withdrew on foot. This was the pattern. American artillery fired freely, displaced quickly, and continued operations without pause. We fired sparingly, displaced slowly, and watched our guns be destroyed 1 battery at a time. The Battle of Metz, which raged throughout November 1944, provided comprehensive demonstration of American artillery superiority across all dimensions of fire support operations. The ancient fortress city had been transformed by German engineers into a defensive complex that should have required months to overcome through conventional siege operations. Concrete fortifications, interconnected bunkers, pre-registered artillery fire zones, all the elements of prepared defense that traditionally favored defenders. American forces under Lieutenant General George S. Patton's Third Army approached Metz with operational plan that emphasized artillery over infantry assault. Rather than conducting costly frontal attacks against prepared positions, American commanders systematically destroyed German defenses through concentrated bombardment. The artillery expenditure during the Metz operation reached levels that German forces found incomprehensible. American batteries fired over 18,000 rounds during the first 3 days of November alone, a volume exceeding German artillery's total ammunition allocation for the entire month. The effectiveness of this firepower was multiplied through the use of proximity fuses and coordinated time-on-target missions that delivered simultaneous impacts from multiple batteries. German defenders in Metz fortifications experienced bombardments that seemed to arrive without warning, explode with devastating accuracy, and continue with intensity that suggested unlimited ammunition supplies. The psychological impact of sustained bombardment proved as decisive as the physical destruction. German units that might have resisted for weeks surrendered within days when subjected to artillery concentrations they could neither counter nor escape. Hartmann's battalion participated in the defense of Metz for 11 days before being withdrawn at 30% strength. The survivors had developed profound respect for American artillery capabilities that bordered on fatalistic acceptance of inevitable defeat. Hartmann documented this psychological shift in letters to his wife that were never delivered, discovered instead in his personal effects after his death in January 1945. We are not being defeated by better soldiers or superior tactics. The American infantryman is adequate but not exceptional. Their tank commanders show competence without brilliance. But their artillery, their cursed artillery, operates at levels we cannot match or counter. They can call fire and receive accurate response in minutes. We require 15 minutes under ideal conditions. They fire thousands of shells without apparent concern for conservation. We ration every round. They employ fuses that detonate their shells at optimal height automatically. We calculate time fuses manually and accept that many shells will be ineffective. This is not a war we can win through courage or skill. This is an industrial contest where American production capacity guarantees their victory regardless of how well we fight. The statistical reality confirmed Hartmann's assessment. By December 1944, American forces in the European theatre possessed approximately 11,000 artillery pieces, ranging from 75mm pack howitzers to 240mm heavy guns. These weapons were supported by ammunition production that delivered over 1 million rounds monthly to units in the field. American artillery battalions averaged expenditure of 300 to 400 rounds per gun per month during active operations, a rate German units could not sustain even briefly without exhausting their entire ammunition allocation. The training pipeline that produced American artillerymen maintained quality through standardization rather than selection for exceptional talent. Fort Sill and other artillery schools processed thousands of officers and enlisted personnel through comprehensive programs that emphasized procedural mastery over individual brilliance. Graduates understood their specific roles within the larger fire support system and could execute those roles with mechanical precision, regardless of tactical circumstances. German artillery training emphasized technical excellence, but could not match American systematic standardization. German artillery officers were expected to calculate firing solutions, understand ballistics comprehensively, and make independent tactical decisions. This produced highly competent individual officers, but created variability in unit effectiveness that depended on personnel quality. American standardization ensured that any artillery unit could perform at acceptable levels, regardless of individual personnel capabilities. The final German offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, beginning December 16, 1944, would provide ultimate demonstration of American artillery superiority under the most challenging conditions imaginable. German forces achieved complete tactical surprise, attacking through the Ardennes in heavy fog that prevented American air operations. The weather conditions that neutralized American air superiority should have provided German forces optimal circumstances for achieving breakthrough before American artillery could respond effectively. Instead, American artillery stopped the German offensive more decisively than any other single factor. Despite initial confusion and tactical setbacks, American forward observers maintained contact with their fire direction centers and continued calling missions that delivered devastating fire on German formations. The coordination system that had proven so effective in Lorraine functioned equally well during the crisis conditions of the Bulge, demonstrating robustness that German commanders had not anticipated. Hartmann's battalion participated in the initial phases of the Bulge offensive, achieving significant penetration during the first 48 hours. Then, American artillery engaged them with intensity that exceeded anything Hartmann had experienced during previous operations. The bombardments employed proximity fuses lavishly, creating airburst patterns that devastated German forces caught in exposed positions during their advance. Within 4 days, Hartmann's battalion had been reduced from 42 operational tanks to 7, primarily through artillery fire rather than tank versus tank combat. The casualty statistics from the Bulge offensive confirmed the decisive nature of American artillery effectiveness. German forces suffered approximately 100,000 casualties during the month-long operation, with artillery fire accounting for estimated 60 to 70% of total losses. American artillery battalions fired over 1 million rounds during the campaign, a volume that represented months of German total production compressed into 30 days of intensive operations. Hartmann died on January 17, 1945, during fighting near Houffalize, Belgium. American forces advancing through the Ardennes encountered his disabled Panther, its engine destroyed by artillery fragments during an engagement 2 days earlier. Hartmann and his crew had remained with their immobilized tank, attempting to provide fire support for retreating German infantry. An American artillery barrage caught them in the open during displacement attempt. The proximity-fused shells that killed Hartmann and his crew provided final demonstration of the weapon system that had rendered German tactical excellence irrelevant. Oberst Müller survived the war and provided extensive testimony during post-war debriefings about German tactical experiences facing American forces. His assessments, preserved in United States Army historical archives, reflect professional soldiers' recognition of systematic defeat through superior organization and resources, rather than individual inadequacy. The Americans overcame us through artillery that could be called and delivered faster than we could react. Their forward observers were adequately trained technicians, executing standardized procedures. Our forward observers were highly trained specialists, making independent decisions. Their system proved superior because it eliminated variability and guaranteed minimum acceptable performance regardless of circumstances. Our system depended on individual excellence that could not be maintained across all units all the time. When facing an opponent with unlimited ammunition and systematic coordination, individual excellence becomes insufficient for success. The legacy of American artillery effectiveness during World War II extended far beyond tactical victories in France and Belgium. The fire direction center concept, the standardized procedures, the emphasis on coordination over individual initiative, all became foundational elements of modern artillery doctrine. The United States Army's current fire support procedures remain recognizably descended from techniques developed during 1944 and 45. Time on target missions, are still the preferred method for coordinating fires from multiple batteries. Fire direction centers remain the hub of artillery operations. Forward observers continue using standardized radio procedures, refined through decades of practice. The proximity fuse, initially developed for anti-aircraft operations, proved its decisive value in ground combat and spawned generations of improved airburst munitions. Modern artillery shells employ sophisticated electronic fuses that can be programmed for precise detonation timing, creating effects tailored to specific target types. The fundamental concept, however, remains identical to the VT fuse that proved so devastating against German forces in 1944. For German soldiers who survived the war, the experience of facing American artillery created lasting recognition of industrial warfare's decisive nature. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt, who survived both the initial ambush and the subsequent Bulge offensive, emigrated to the United States in 1951. He provided oral history interviews during the 1980s that revealed his changed perspective on military effectiveness. "I entered the war believing German soldiers were superior, that our training and equipment would guarantee victory. I concluded the war understanding that systematic organization and industrial capacity matter more than individual courage. The Americans did not defeat us through better soldiers. They defeated us through better systems. Their artillery was called faster, delivered more accurately, supplied more abundantly than anything we could match. This was not failure of German military competence. This was recognition that modern war is won by factories and logistics as much as by soldiers and tactics." The story of German tankers facing American artillery represents, ultimately, a case study in military transformation during the industrial age. Traditional measures of military effectiveness, individual soldier quality, tactical acumen, technical superiority in specific weapon systems, remained important but were overshadowed by systematic organization and industrial capacity. The Americans created a fire support system that transformed adequate soldiers into devastatingly effective combat units through comprehensive training, reliable equipment, and abundant resources. German forces, despite superior technical training and combat experience at the individual level, could not overcome systematic disadvantages in coordination, supply, and industrial support. Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann's ambush represented everything German armor doctrine did correctly: proper reconnaissance, optimal positioning, technical superiority in tank versus tank combat, tactical discipline in execution. The ambush succeeded perfectly, according to traditional measures. German guns destroyed multiple American tanks with minimal friendly casualties during the initial engagement, yet, within 7 minutes, the tactical success had been transformed into operational disaster through American artillery that arrived with impossible speed and devastating accuracy. The equation was simple and undeniable. German tactical excellence could not overcome American systematic superiority. The time required for German forces to execute successful tactics exceeded the time required for American forces to call and deliver overwhelming fire support. In such an environment, German victory was never operationally viable regardless of how well individual units performed. The transformation of warfare that American artillery represented would become even more pronounced in subsequent conflicts. Korea, Vietnam, and later operations would see continued refinement of fire support procedures that originated during World War II. The integration of helicopters, then drones, then satellite communications, would further compress response times and improve accuracy. But the fundamental principle established during 1944 remained constant: systematic coordination of fire support, executed through standardized procedures by adequately trained personnel with reliable equipment and abundant resources, provides decisive advantage over opponents relying on individual excellence without systematic support. For modern military professionals studying World War II, the German experience facing American artillery provides critical lessons that remain relevant. Technical superiority in specific weapon systems cannot overcome systematic disadvantages in coordination and logistics. Individual soldier quality matters less than organizational effectiveness when facing opponents with superior command and control systems. Training that produces exceptional specialists is less effective than training that produces adequate technicians who can execute standardized procedures reliably. Perhaps most significantly, industrial capacity to sustain intensive operations through abundant supply determines outcomes more decisively than tactical brilliance or operational artistry. The American artillery system that destroyed Hartmann's carefully planned ambush in under 4 minutes represented these principles in their most refined form. Forward observers adequately trained to execute standardized procedures. Fire direction centers organized to process requests with mechanical efficiency. Gun crews rehearsed to load and fire with maximum speed. Ammunition supplies effectively unlimited through industrial production capacity. Radio equipment reliable and abundant. Firing tables pre-computed to eliminate field calculations. Proximity fuses eliminating the need for precise timing adjustments. Every element of the system had been designed to maximize effectiveness through standardization, coordination, and resource abundance, rather than depending on exceptional individual performance. German forces, organized around principles of individual initiative and tactical flexibility that had proven successful during early war campaigns, found themselves systematically defeated by an opponent who had solved military effectiveness through industrial methods. The courage of German soldiers, the tactical skill of German commanders, the technical sophistication of German equipment, all remained genuine and significant, but they proved insufficient against systematic organization supported by industrial capacity that Germany could not match. The artillery that arrived 4 minutes after Hartmann's ambush represented not just military effectiveness, but civilizational capacity. The radios connecting forward observers to fire direction centers were products of American electronics industry. The 155mm shells were products of American manufacturing. The proximity fuses were products of American scientific research. The trucks that moved artillery batteries were products of American automotive industry. The training that produced competent forward observers was product of American institutional organization. The entire system represented integration of industrial, scientific, and organizational capabilities that reflected American society's fundamental characteristics: systematic standardization, industrial abundance, technological innovation, and institutional effectiveness. For Hartmann and his fellow German tank commanders, this reality proved more daunting than any tactical challenge they had faced during years of combat. They were not being defeated by better individual soldiers or superior tactical doctrine. They were being overcome by an opponent whose societal organization produced military capabilities that individual excellence could not counter. The recognition that courage, skill, and dedication were insufficient for success proved psychologically devastating in ways that tactical defeat never could be. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.